Good morning, Crestview. So glad you're here to worship with us this morning. Let's stand. Let's worship our God together. Sing it out. Gotta dance through the darkness, sing through the fire, praise when it don't make sense. Sometimes you've got to stare down the giant, worship from the lion's den. Sometimes you've got to shout from the mountain, louder in the valley, trusting that it's gonna would he fail now? He won't. He won't. I've still got joy in chaos. I've got peace that makes no sense. But I won't be going under. I'm not held by my own strength, 'cause I built my life on Jesus. He's never let me down. He's faithful in every season. So why would he fail now? He won't. He won't. He won't fail. He won't fail. Christ is my firm foundation, the rock on which I stand. Everything around me is shaking. I've never been more glad that I put my faith in Jesus. 'Cause he's never let me down. He's faithful through generations. So why would he fail now? He won't. He won't. He won't fail. He won't safe with you. I'm gonna make it through. The rain came and wind blew. My house was built on you. Oh, I'm safe with you. I'm gonna make it through. Yeah, I'm gonna make it through. 'Cause I'm standing strong on you. Yeah, I'm gonna make it through. 'Cause my house was built on you. Christ is my firm foundation, the rock on which I stand. When everything around me is shaking, I've never been more glad that I put my faith in Jesus. He's never let me down. He's faithful to generations. So why would he fail now? He won't fail. He won't fail. He won't. He won't. He won't fail. He won't fail. No, he won't. Will you join me in prayer? Father God, may we never stop being in awe of who you are. Even when the entire world around us is shaken, may that be the moment that we are never more glad that we find a firm foundation in your Son. God, we thank you that you are a source of unending encouragement, strength to make it through the day. Father, may our faith rest in you. May our faith seek you. And God, as we live our lives, may we live our lives as a life of worship, declaring the goodness of our God in all that we say and all that we do. God, move in our hearts right now as we hear from your word. Speak your truth to us. It's in your son's name we pray. Amen. You can have a seat.
Hey, Crestview, good morning. Great to see you. I'm glad you guys chose to be here this morning. Start your week off here. Hey, if you're new with us, I'm glad that you're here. Welcome, and I hope that you do feel welcome here this morning for all of us. So, crestview.info. This is where you can go to find out anything that's going on, that's coming up, that's happening at the church. If you are new, we have a connection card that you can fill out there. And if you're watching online, I'm glad that you're watching as well. You can go to crestview.info and find all this stuff out. But if you'd fill out that connection card for us, it helps us get connected with you. And there's a lot of other stuff that's on there as well. You can give online. You can leave a prayer request online that way as well at crestview.info. Or if you want to write one out, there's cards on the table in the back where the communion's at. Fill out one of those cards, put it in the offering box that's back there, and we will lift you up and pray for you this week. We got all kinds of stuff coming up, though. Fall has kicked off here, and we got stuff for our kiddos. If you got kids in elementary, we got some events and activities coming up. It's on crestview.info. Junior high, I know there's some stuff with junior high. High school, we've got stuff for our students that is coming up. Even our retired group, our Joy group, they've got an event this week. If you want to be a part of that, look at that. But a couple things I want to point out. Next Sunday, we have a newcomer lunch. So if you've been coming over the last few months, new to Crestview, next Sunday, we want to just serve you lunch. So stay after our second service. And it's just a time for us to get to know you a little bit and for you to get to know us. So it's just a better way to make a connection than just outside of the lobby on a Sunday morning. And we will serve you lunch for that to get to know you a little bit. Then the Sunday after that, October 1st, we're going to have a Discover Crestview class. And that's going to be during our second service. So during our 10:30 service, we're going to do it in one shot. It's going to last a little longer. It's going to go from 10:30 to noon. To make that work. But if you are newer to Crestview and you want to know more about our background, our history, what we believe, things like that, and you want to learn a little bit more about the church, that's a class for you. And then the Sunday after that, we're starting a new class for any of you that want to learn a little bit more about the Bible, some Bible basics. Just Bible 101. If this is a new book to you and you're trying to figure out what it means, how to read it, where it came from, those kind of things, we're going to start a class during our second service. You can come to first hour, and then in our youth room during the second service, we'll start teaching this and unpacking to help you understand this a little bit better, some basics on this class. So we'd love for you to be a part of that. There's just some cool things coming up. So what we did, and if you're new with us, you missed some of this, but if you missed a couple of Sundays this summer, I'd encourage you to go back and listen. Jump on YouTube or Facebook. You can find those messages there, our whole services. But we spent the summer, 14 weeks. It was a long 14 weeks studying this book on the book of Romans. So Paul wrote this letter to a church in Rome, and it was really foundational for our Christian faith, to understand and build a foundation so that you can build off of that and what that looks like. It is a foundational study for Christianity. What does Christianity really mean? What does it look like? How do we get here? Romans does that. That letter that Paul wrote to the church in Rome was huge for that, building that foundation. Maybe for you now, though, you're rebuilding something. So I thought about this through the summer, like, okay, how are we going to follow that up? What's that going to be like? And maybe you had to rebuild that foundation, or maybe you had the foundation already, and that was a good series for you to say, no, this is it, and now I need to build off of that. Maybe it's your Christian faith. You know, what do you believe in? Maybe it's your marriage that you're saying we need to focus in on this a little bit and build this. How do you build off of that foundation, a marriage or any relationships? Maybe it's a career or just some things, different things in your life. How do you rebuild something off of that foundation now? Well, here's where I'm going with this. We spent 2 weeks in this series on Romans, but Paul spent actually 3 chapters. There are 3 chapters in the book of Romans about Israel. And we spent 2 weeks talking about Israel and how special the Jewish people are to God. God has a special relationship with his people, the Jewish people, and Israel. So I want to take the next 5 weeks and tell you a story from the Old Testament. Okay, so we're going to go back in time a little bit from Romans. We're going to go back in time and look at a story from a guy called Nehemiah. His name was Nehemiah. And this is a story about how God shows how much he cares about Israel, and specifically Jerusalem, and the story of Nehemiah and what God did through him to rebuild Jerusalem and the walls around the town. So let me give you some background, little history on this, little background. Jerusalem is a city that has been fought over, and I came up with 16 times. I know it's a lot more than that, but 16 major events that happened with this. Some have it up to like 44 different times where it was fought over and different things happened. Twice in its history, it has been destroyed. The walls have been destroyed, the city had been destroyed, and it had to be rebuilt at some level. So if we look at some history with this, 100 years before Jesus. So 100 years BC, before Jesus, around that time, I'm rounding a little bit, King Solomon comes in and he builds the temple in Jerusalem. This is where God dwells. So this is an important spot. It's not in a tent anymore. It's in a temple. But the Babylonians come on. I'm saying it completely wrong. 1,000 years. Sorry, some of you are sitting out there looking at me going, hey, I have a question. You already messed up. Wasn't it 1,000 years, Solomon, not 100? 1,000 years before Jesus, Solomon. You knew that I was second-guessing myself that whole time. 100 years after that, the evil Babylonians come in and they take it over. And they destroy this city. They take it over, and the destruction of Jerusalem and the city walls. And again, I'm rounding some of those numbers a little bit. King Nebuchadnezzar at the time, and they just lay waste to the city of Jerusalem. This meant that the people that were living there and the exiles that were there, they were open to attack again. I mean, it's not a safe place now to live, but Babylon falls. So now we're talking 500 years before Jesus, somewhere around that time, Babylon falls. And in the book of Ezra, in the Old Testament, we see that these people, there's about 50,000 of them that move back into Jerusalem and they rebuild the temple. The temple gets rebuilt, the place where God dwells, the place that's holy to them, and they rebuild the temple. However, the walls around the city don't get rebuilt. They tried, but they just couldn't get it done. And so the walls are still torn down. The protection that they have for that, the gates that they protected coming and going, they're gone. And so they're open to attack still. So along comes a story in the Old Testament about a guy named Nehemiah. So we're talking about 450 years before Jesus now. Nehemiah comes along, and this is the story of Nehemiah coming back in and rebuilding the walls around Jerusalem to protect the city and how much this means to God. Now, let me give you some perspective. We're not talking like the walls like the size of this room. We're talking much bigger than this. This is a big deal. Perspective on the walls around Jerusalem. They estimate it's about 2.5 miles long of walls around the city. So 2.5 miles of walls. And they're not just, like a privacy fence in your backyard. These walls are 39 feet high. When you think 39 feet high, 22.5 miles around, and 8.2 miles wide. The walls are 8.2. Gosh. Can I start over? Some of you are thinking, this guy's losing it. 8.2 feet wide. Okay. 8 feet wide, 39 feet high, and 2.5 miles long. Are we there? Okay, take some notes. We should put it on the screen so that I can see this. So here's the deal. Nehemiah first had to find a need. What need are you working on in your life? What is it for you? For me, it's numbers and math, okay? I got to go back to school for it. What need is it in your life that you're rebuilding? Maybe it is your marriage. Maybe it is a relationship with your kids. Maybe it is, do you have a need? What need is in front of you that you're saying, okay, I have this foundation now. How do I build off of this, and what do I do? So if you have your Bibles, Nehemiah chapter 1 is where we're going to start. If you don't have a Bible, but you want one with like pages and words, we have a couple in the table on the back. If you have your phones, we have this YouVersion Bible app that we use. And if you go to that, in the events part of that, you can find Crestview, and we have where you can follow along. You can see all the notes that we're taking, the passages that are there. You can follow along with it there. Nehemiah chapter 1, starting with verse 1. Here it is. In the month of Kislev, in the 20th year, while I was in the citadel of Susa, Hanani, one of my brothers, came from Judah with some other men, and I questioned them about the Jewish remnant that survived the exile and also about Jerusalem. So he's asking them, hey, you guys just got back from Jerusalem. How's it looking? What's the city like? Have they rebuilt? Does it look good? Are things in place? He's passionate about it because he's from that remnant. He's a Jewish man, and he's thinking about his city. They said to me, those who survived the exile are back in the province, are in great trouble and disgrace. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down, and its gates have been burned with fire. When I heard these things, he said, I sat down and wept. Okay, put yourself in the shoes of Nehemiah. No doubt, for him, it was just another day. All right, when his brother came to visit, it was just, he woke up saying, here's my list of things to do today. It was just another day for him. But when he heard this news from his brother about the city that he loves, the place that he loves, where his heritage is at, it changed him. That quick news changed his heart, his mind, what was going on, what he was going to do. And I think about it like this often. Big changes in our life often happen with quickly, little news. Like you can think back to some big changes that you made in your life and that day and that time that it happened. I often think of it like this as well. Large doors, big doors that we have that are too heavy for us to pick up and carry, but when you put them on a door frame and hinges on them, they can swing open easily. So great life-changing events sometimes swing on small hinges. And that happens to us. We hear some news, things happen, and we say, I'm going to change. I'm going to make it different on this. It was just another day when Moses was out tending sheep. And there was a bush that was on fire, but it wasn't burning, and God was calling him. It's just another day when David was out tending sheep, and they called him home, and he was anointed to be the next king. Just another day when a young girl named Mary was approached by an angel. And even though she was a virgin, the angel said, you're pregnant with the Messiah. Just another day when Peter and Andrew and James and John were fishing and not doing very well, when Jesus came along and said, I'm going to teach you something different. They became followers of Jesus. It was just another day when what happened? When you decided, I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm not going to watch that anymore. I'm not going to take that anymore. I'm not going to do that thing anymore. Or I'm going to do this. And I'm going to make a difference, and I'm going to make a change, and I'm going to make it happen. What is God calling you to do? What is he asking you to build? What are your gifts and your talents and your position, your passion? What does he ask? What has he designed you to do? Here's the crazy part for me. This was not new news to Nehemiah. This wasn't like, oh, wait, what? The walls are torn down? I didn't know that. Nehemiah knew the walls have been torn down his whole life. This is old news. The walls have been torn down for many, many years. He just assumed somebody had fixed it by now. He just made the assumption, they're not fixed yet? And it changed him. On this day, that news, it just hit different for him. It just something clicked for him. And he had to confirm it now. So how will you know? How will you know that this is a need? Sometimes you have to test it with God. So you have to go to God and you have to confirm it with him. God, is this where you're leading me? Is this what you want me to do? So let's look at this. Verse 4, then this is what it said. When I heard the things, I sat down and I wept. For some days I mourned and fasted and prayed before the God of heaven. Then I said, I don't know if you read too fast, sometimes you miss some things, but I want to make sure you catch this. Before he said his prayer is coming up. He's getting ready to pray to God. Before he prays, it says he mourned and he fasted and he prayed. He prayed before he prayed. He mourned, he cried, and he fasted and he prayed. When it comes to big, important decisions in your life, things that you're going to work on and build in your life, do you cry about it? Have you fasted about it? Have you prayed about praying about it? Not just prayed about it, but have you built up to that? I've heard people say before, overnight success usually takes years. It's usually not overnight. Nehemiah prayed, and we can see through this passage, he prayed for 4 months before he prayed to God. Before the prayer that we see here, he prayed and he fasted and he cried out to God. You know, there's no success without suffering, and if you ever have success or experience success, please know somebody probably somewhere suffered if you weren't also the one suffering. But then he prayed to God. So let's read this. This is his prayer. I'm going to read this whole prayer to you. It's not going to be on the screen, but I want to read it to you. He said it this way: "O Lord, God of heaven, the great and awesome God who keeps his covenant of love with those who love him and obey his commands, let your ear be attentive and your eyes be open to hear the prayer your servant is praying before you day and night for your servants, the people of Israel. I confess the sins we Israelites, including myself and my father's house, have committed against you. We have acted very wickedly toward you. We have not obeyed the commands, decrees, and laws you gave your servant Moses." So he's making a confession of faith. He's giving God glory, making a confession. He goes, "Remember your instructions that you gave to Moses, saying that if you are unfaithful, I will scatter you among the nations. But if you return to me and obey my commands, then even if your exiled people are at the furthest horizon, I will gather them from there and bring them to the place that I've chosen as a dwelling for my name. They are your servants and your people, whom you redeemed by your great strength and your mighty hand. O Lord, let your ear be attentive to the prayer of this your servant and to the prayer of your servants who delight in revering your name. Give your servant this success today by granting him favor in the presence of this man." He's talking about the king. So now he's getting ready to go stand before the king. He's praying to God to remind God of what he has asked of him. And then he closes his prayer like this, or in his book: "I was a cupbearer to the king." Verse 11. Why would he put that in there? This is Nehemiah writing this. He wants us to make sure that we know he was a cupbearer to the king. A cupbearer was pretty important. A cupbearer would have been the last line of defense up to the king. They were the ones that got to test all the food and the wine that got to the king. So if anybody wanted to poison the king, they would have had to poison the cupbearer first. So this was a very trusted position. The king trusted this person more than anybody else, because if they wanted to get rid of the king, they would try and poison him in his food or his drink. And so the cupbearer would taste it. And if he died, well, then the king wouldn't drink that. But if he lived, then it was safe for him to drink. So the king trusted this guy. His position was very important. He was a cupbearer to the king, and he was getting ready to go in and talk to and be in front of the king. This was going to take boldness if he was going to do it. So my next thing that I would encourage you to is to be bold. Be bold in what you're getting ready to build. Don't make it some small thing that you can do today. Make it something that's going to take some effort. Be bold in what you're building in your life and working on. This is what it says, verses 1 and 2 in chapter 2. "When the wine was brought to him, I took the wine in and I gave it to the king. I had not been sad in his presence before, so the king asked me, 'Why does your face look so sad when you are not ill? This can be nothing but sadness of the heart.' And he said, 'I was very afraid.'" He was afraid of replying to the king because he knew that his sadness was showing. He was still mourning and crying over what was happening in Jerusalem still. But you should never be that way in front of the king. If the king notices that you're sad, he can notice, hey, you're not on your game today. I might not trust you today. In fact, there have been news that people had died. Cupbearers had died. The king killed them because they couldn't trust them anymore. He was jeopardizing his own position, even his own life, by even being sad in front of the king. This took boldness. He was risking his own life. We see in verse 3, but I said to the king, here is his bold move, may the king live forever. Why should my face not look sad when the city where my fathers are buried lies in ruins and its gates have been destroyed by fire? And the king said to me, what is it you want? Then I prayed to the God of heaven, and I answered the king. Notice something different here in this passage, and I love this point. First, we see that he prayed before he even prayed. So he prayed before he prayed, and he prayed for 4 months before he even said a prayer to God. Then he said this prayer to God and asked God for help as he was getting ready to do this. Now he prays again, but it doesn't take him 4 months. It takes a comma. It says, then I prayed, comma, and I answered the king. It was a prayer like that. It was an instant prayer. Sometimes we get used to those and we just pray instantly all the time, but he has already prayed before he prayed, and now he prays an instant prayer. Therefore, I believe a relationship with God needs to be nurtured. Regular times of prayer, often times of prayer, so that when you get into a position where you need that right away, you can say that instant prayer and it will work because you've already prayed for it. And I believe this as well. Some things don't need to be prayed for. I mean, some things are just obvious. You don't have to pray to say, God, do you want me to work on my marriage? I mean, should we have better communication? Should I want a better relationship with myself? You don't have to pray for that. The answer is yes. Already. You don't, God, you want me to rob this bank? Yes or no? I'm trying to find out if that's the way you want me to get rich. The answer is no. I mean, you get it, right? There are some things I'm not supposed to do those things. I don't have to pray about it. There are some things I need to do this. You don't have to pray about it. Just do it. There are also things that you've already prayed for. You've already spent time praying for it. So when that moment comes, he didn't say to the king, "Ooh, good question. Give me a couple days. I'm going to go pray about how I answer this." He was ready when the moment came up. When it happened, he was ready. So he said to the king, verse 5, "If it pleases the king and your servant has found favor in his sight, let him send me to the city in Judah where my fathers are buried so that I can rebuild it." Then the king, with the queen sitting next to him. Check that. This is important. I think this is a pretty big deal. With the queen sitting next to him. Why mention the queen? He mentioned the queen, I think, for a couple reasons. One, it shows that it was probably a private setting, because oftentimes the king was not with the queen, or the queen was not with the king during big festivals. There were times when the king was by himself and the queen was not there. This would indicate that the queen was probably sitting next to him because it was a private setting. So it might have just been the three of them, the king, the queen, and Nehemiah, having a little conversation, sitting in a room. It's important to note because many scholars believe, we're not certain, we're not sure, you can double check, you can look into it, I don't know for certain, but many people believe that the queen sitting next to the king at this time was Queen Esther. Could be. Esther is actually after Nehemiah, but yet they often believe that they might have been in a different order chronologically, and this was Queen Esther sitting next to the king. If that's the case, she also had risked her life in front of the king for her people, the Jewish people. And if she's the one sitting there, and Nehemiah knows this, Nehemiah might be encouraged by that to say, you were willing to risk your life. That gives me courage to risk mine, to make this bold request. It could also mean that the king also is encouraged to give him favor. If his queen, who is also a Jewish remnant, is sitting next to him, he might have a soft heart now for what Nehemiah is getting ready to do. Maybe, maybe not, just a thing. Either way, I think Nehemiah knew something about timing. And he knew this was his chance. He was ready to go for it. And so the rest of this, as you read down there, this is Nehemiah makes a bold request, and he requests to get letters. He's going to travel from where he's at back to Jerusalem. He needs letters for safety as he travels through these different regions to get back to Jerusalem. And so he says, can you write me a couple letters so that I can get through? Because you're the king, and if you write a letter, I can show it to them, and they'll let me pass. Also, once I get there, I'm going to need some lumber. I'm going to need some timber. I'm going to need some wood to rebuild these gates. Can you write a letter to the forest, the guy in charge of the forest, so that when I pass through that, I can cut down some trees and I can take those with me into Jerusalem? And the king writes these letters for him. I think of it like this as well. What would you do? What would you ask for? What would you do? What would you ask God for, the king for, if you knew you couldn't fail? If you knew you couldn't fail, if you knew you were going to succeed at whatever you're rebuilding in your life, what would you ask for? Ask for it. 20 years from now, you will be more disappointed in what you don't do than what you do. 20 years from now, when you look back on your life, you're going to be more disappointed in the things you said, I wish I would have done that. I wish I would have taken that risk. I wish I would have tried that, more than you will the things you did do. And I believe today, what you do today will affect the rest of your life. Who you associate with today will affect the rest of your life. The plans you make today will affect the rest of your life. So be bold. Figure out, what are you working on? And then develop a strategy for that. Figure it out. What's next? Chapter 2. In chapter 2, we see that Nehemiah, I'm just going to tell you the story. He gets into Jerusalem. He makes the journey. He's now in Jerusalem, and he spends 3 days not telling anybody what he's doing. I'm sure people were asking, what's the dude with the army and the extra people and all the lumber? What's he all about? But he spends 3 days not telling anybody his plans, not revealing anything. And he spends time walking around the city. He walks around the city, and mostly at night, so that he can observe what it is he's working on. What parts of the wall are completely destroyed? What parts of the wall are only half destroyed? What parts do we need to spend more time on? Which gates do I need to fix first? And he doesn't tell anybody about this. He keeps part of that a secret. There are some people that do know, that are close to him, but for the most part, he hasn't come out and revealed. He doesn't walk into the city and say, hey, I'm here to rebuild. He keeps some of that until he has a plan. You don't have to tell everybody what you're doing. Hey, I took a shower this morning and I had this bright idea. I'm going to change the world today. Until you have a plan. In fact, it's wisdom. Proverbs chapter 10, verse 14, it says, the wise store up knowledge, but the mouth of a fool invites ruin. Collect some knowledge. What do you need to work on? Develop a strategy. Let your actions speak more for you than anything else. See, the Jews had already tried to rebuild the walls, and it didn't work. So he needs a strategy and a plan before he jumps in and starts with that. So make an action plan for your life. Set some goals on what you want to work on and build on. It was fun this last week. April and I got through a major thing in our lives, meaning our daughter got married last week. And it was a great event. But as you get through something like that, we started asking the question again. She's feeling much better than she has before over the last year. And so we even asked the question this week. So what's next? It's fun, right? It's a good question. What's next? What do you want to do next? What's next in your life? What are you going to build off of the foundation that God has set for you? I'd encourage you, find the need. Find the need. What is that need? Confirm it with God. God, is this where you're leading me, and this is what you want me to do? Be bold in that. Be bold in what you're working on. Then develop a strategy. How are you going to get there? What's it going to look like? So we're going to spend some time over the next few weeks talking about Nehemiah and what he did. This is just step one for him. But I want you to know you can't do it alone. Next week, we're going to talk about how do you build then, how do you get some people around you, how do you work on this together? You can't do it alone. There's value in partnerships with others and what we can do together and how we can accomplish that. But the first step is you. And if you haven't taken some of those steps, if you haven't said, all right, if you don't know how to pray to God or who God is to even pray for him, that's your first step. If you don't know who he is, I'd encourage you to come and learn who God is for you, what Jesus has done for you. If you have, start praying for that. Start to build that foundation of what God has done for you. And let's keep working on that. If you would, we're going to prepare our hearts for a time to remember what Jesus has done. So if you would, let's stand together. Let's sing as we get ready for that.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Dakota Schertz. I'm one of the youth pastors here at Crestview. We are now moving into our next phase of worship, which is going to be offering communion. Here at Crestview, there are multiple ways to give. You can give online at crestview.info/give. There are 2 boxes in the back of the room you can drop your gift in. You can mail it in, or you can drop it at the office sometime. What I want us to remember is that offering is not a time of obligation or guilt or to impress your neighbor. It's a time that we get to trust, we get to obey, and we get to enjoy in Thanksgiving. We get to trust because we have to trust that God is going to take our gift and he's going to use it in ways that we could not do on our own. And we have to also trust that he's going to meet our needs afterward. It's a chance we get to obey because we have to obey God's calling for us, that we give willingly and we give joyfully. There's this really cool quote by this guy named Timothy Keller. He's a really cool author that I love a lot, and he passed away very recently. And he said, "A lack of generosity refuses to acknowledge that the assets we have are not our own, but God's." We have to realize that what we have was given to us from God, and we are in charge of that, and we're supposed to use that responsibly. And if we do not do so, we're being bad stewards of it. We have to use it well. We have to realize that our assets are not our own, but they're God's. We have to be really good about doing that. And if you ask my parents say that I'm really good about spending money that's not mine. And so that's kind of the attitude we have to have. What's ours is not ours, it's God's. We have to give back to God what he needs so that we can continue to further his church. The next phase of worship is communion. Devin just talked to you guys about how Nehemiah and his preparation and what that looked like. And communion is celebrating Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection, right? In the back, there are 2 cups. And in the bottom cup, you have the piece of bread that represents Jesus' body that was broken and given for us. And the juice represents his blood that was poured out for us, right? That's one. If we look at that as one event, even though it was 3 days, if we look at it as one event, that's what happened. Jesus died, Jesus was buried, and he was resurrected. But I think we're remiss if we miss what Jesus did prior to that, his preparation. Jesus spent 33 years preparing himself for that one moment. If Jesus messed up once, if Jesus sinned once, if he disobeyed his parents just once, it would be for nothing. If there was one speck on that spotless lamb, that perfect sacrifice, then it would have been for nothing, right? Jesus was the perfect sacrifice for us. He spent 33 years preparing himself for that moment so that we can live with him in paradise. So after I pray for you guys, feel free to partake in communion, remembering his death, burial, and resurrection, but also those 33 years leading up to it, that preparation. Bow your head with me. Heavenly Father, thank you for this morning. Thank you for a time that we get to come together as believers, a time that we get to worship with you, and we get to remember what you did for us, remember what your son did for us. Thank you for today. I pray that you keep close to us throughout the rest of this week. In your name I pray. Amen.
talk about next steps. We'd love to meet with you right out at Fireside. Have a great week, everyone. We'll see you next Sunday. Take care.